Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Phil Ponce in our Northwest Side studios, sitting in for Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz, coming to you from my home in Lakeview because of the coronavirus pandemic. We'll have our full Week in Review panel in just a bit, but first, Phil, back to you for the latest developments from today.
Thank you, Paris. Governor J.B. Pritzker says essential workers can get tested for COVID-19 whether or not they have symptoms. The new testing eligibility applies to workers at grocery stores, restaurants, and gas stations. But as testing expands and the positivity rate drops, Pritzker stresses caution over Illinois and neighboring states reopening what he considers to be too soon.
I am concerned. I am genuinely concerned that with no stay-at-home order in place in Iowa, that people who are traveling across the border and gathering in large groups or going into restaurants or bars or getting in close contact with others will asymptomatically come back to Illinois and spread it.
Illinois public health officials also announced nearly 2,500 new cases for a total of more than 90,000 statewide and an additional 130 deaths for a total of 4,058. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is asking religious leaders not to hold in-person services this weekend, saying she'll use enforcement if necessary. Lightfoot sent a letter this morning warning them to follow the rules which allow gatherings of no more than 10 people who stay at least 6 feet apart. Two Chicago churches, Elam Romanian Pentecostal Church in Albany Park, seen here, and Metro Praise International Church in Belmont Cragen, have defied the order. For more on this story, you can visit our website. One alderman says any demolition at the former Crawford Power Plant should be postponed until after the pandemic comes to an end. Alderman Mike Rodriguez of the 22nd Ward called Mayor Lightfoot's decision to delay the project, quote, a good thing. The mayor called off further planned demolition late last night after protests erupted outside her home. Controversy over the project began weeks ago when the demolition of the former coal plant smokestack sent a plume of dust across Chicago's Little Village neighborhood. More on our website. Illinois U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth is in the running to be a running mate for presidential candidate Joe Biden. That's according to fellow Senator Dick Durbin. The Chicago Tribune reports Durbin made comments today saying Duckworth will be interviewing for the post soon. Reached this afternoon, a Duckworth spokesperson did not confirm an upcoming meeting with Biden, but Duckworth has said in national interviews she wants to do what she can to get Biden elected. In March, Biden announced he will pick a woman as his vice presidential running mate. And I'll be back in a bit to fill you in on what we have in store for you next week on Chicago Tonight. But now to the Week in Review and Paris.
Thank you, Phil. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm hosting here from home. Our guests are coming to us from all over the region via video conferencing technology, and they are Steve Daniels of Crane Chicago Business, John Cass of the Chicago Tribune, Laura Washington of the Chicago Sun-Times, and Greg Pratt, also of the Chicago Tribune. So let's dig right into it. Deaths now top 4,000 in Illinois, and this week has seen some of the highest number of new cases, although also the highest numbers of testing. Greg Pratt, I ask this every week, where does that put us? Are we bending the curve? Is the state plateaued? Is it on the other side of the curve? Where are we?
Well, they keep saying that we haven't even peaked and we're not going to peak until next month. And so we're at a point where it isn't going up anymore and it's not growing the same way it used to. And so it's slowed, but we're nowhere near out of the woods. And what's interesting is in March, they said the peak would be April. Then they said it was May. Now they're saying it's going to be June. And I think people are starting to feel really anxious about when is this actually going to stop.
John Cass, the governor, despite these numbers, says that all regions of the state, including Chicago, might be ready to move on to phase 3 of his reopen plan by June. What is he basing that on?
I don't know. Does he release the numbers or his findings at his news conferences? It seems more likely a lot of it's general stuff that he keeps saying. But I mean, look, nobody wants to be sick. Nobody wants to get people sick. I don't. I wear a mask when I go to the store, not when I'm picking up after the dog outside. But yeah, I mean, people are getting tired. I think everybody here knows can see, like, as a political story, the people want to get back. They want to get out. It's nice out. This weekend is really nice. We're going to see what the crime figures tell us, the shootings. People are just getting tired of this.
Well, and at the same time, Wisconsin and Iowa are reopening. And Wisconsin is thanks to a Supreme Court decision that struck down the stay-at-home order. Steve Daniels, how do you think the situation is going to play out in those states over the next few weeks?
Yeah, it's kind of frightening. It's a little bit of a real-time test of what a true reopening is going to do. We saw some video today of the Brat Stop, which I think a lot of Chicagoans are familiar with, right over the border, and it was packed. It was packed full of people drinking, carousing, whatever. Just looked like as if nothing out of the ordinary was occurring. You know, if that turns out to be a risk that was worth taking, and lots of people don't get sick and don't get others sick, then that will tell us something. But from what we know so far of this virus, that's probably not a good idea. So, you know, there were no social distancing precautions taken at all. And so I think, you know, when you don't have this sort of centrally controlled and standards in place, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see businesses make decisions for themselves. You're going to see people make decisions for themselves. Philosophically, people have different views of whether that's right or not, but that's what we're going to test.
Laura Washington, will Chicagoans make the decision to go across the border to Wisconsin, to the Brat Stop, to Lake Geneva, to engage in activities that they can't do in Illinois?
That's always a possibility, and I think you will see more of that. You're also going to see businesses, especially businesses that are located near the border, the Illinois-Wisconsin border. You're going to see them, and that we've already heard from them. They're very concerned that the Illinois business is going to be losing business to these businesses that are opening up. You know, the whole point that Steve makes about, you know, you have to wait and find out. The problem is, when we find out, if we guessed wrong, if those businesses and those other institutions that opened up too soon guessed wrong, we're all in a heap of trouble. But I think it's also true, as Greg points out, that there's a lot of anxiety that's building up because of the weather, because it's just a long wait, and also because to many people, these numbers and the announcements from J.B. Pritzker, from Lori Lightfoot, they seem to be moving targets. One week it's, you know, we're going to be through this by the end of May. Then the next week, it seems like we're going to be in this till June. The numbers change over time, and that's understandable. If you listen to the governor, he'll tell you they change over time because we're doing far more testing. We've got far more information that we can make more educated guesses on. But to folks who aren't paying close attention and those folks who are anxious, it just looks like, what's the big deal? And I think it's going to encourage more people to break the rules rather than less.
So is it possible that some of the messaging has been confused from Governor Pritzker? And I'm really having trouble, or I'm having trouble still trying to understand why liquor stores and Home Depots are open, but then when they say church is not essential, I don't understand how they say that, and how they, you know, I think Greg had a story today, or was it yesterday, Greg? Churches want to open and people want to go to church.
It's been 3 stories this week.
I'm sorry, Greg, 3.
You know, first the mayor said, don't do this, after some people did it on Monday. Then she said, I will crack down. And then she said, please don't do it. I don't want to crack down, but I will. And now she's saying, really, I mean it. Don't do it. I'll crack down. Which to John's
Willie
point
Wilson's
is
pushing it. Willie
Willie's
Wilson's pushing it on the side. And people, you know, I mean, to just tell people you can go to a Home Depot, but you can't sit down in a restaurant and have a patty melt. He's killing the restaurant business. And people are confused and they're angry and they're tired.
Well, on that front, the mayor indicated today there might be some relief for restaurants in Chicago, with perhaps loosening of restrictions to allow them to have outdoor dining on streets and on sidewalks. Greg, do you know any more about some of these plans?
No, the mayor, so I've been covering the mayor, of course. I cover the mayor full time. And, she is very concerned and talks about it all the time that the restaurants are in trouble. And Chicago, as Sam Toy often points out, is full of small mom and pop restaurants and local restaurants. It's
Sam
not
Toy
an
is the
Olive
head of the
Garden city.
Restaurant Association, by the way.
Yeah, and I always get a kick out of him pointing out that we have one Olive Garden in town and we're not Tampa Bay or something like that. And so I know she's really concerned, and she's talking about in June we want to reopen restaurants. And she wasn't very specific. She talked to me about it this afternoon. She said cautiously. Now, what that means and what that looks like, and whether she can get that past J.B. Pritzker is ultimately the big test and the big question.
I think, Paris,
Well,
you're
Steve
starting
Daniels,
to see some.
go ahead, Laura.
Paris, I think you're starting
ahead.
to see some daylight between J.B. Pritzker and Lori Lightfoot, and this has been an evolving relationship. And they've disagreed from time to time, very quietly and subtly, but they disagreed on when there was the right time to close the schools. And now I think you see some room for maneuvering here, where Lori Lightfoot appears to be listening more to the Sam Toyas of the world, who are saying, if we don't open up restaurants soon, we're going to lose a quarter or more of the restaurants we have in the city. And they're saying we've got to come up with some strategic ways of getting beyond this no that we're hearing from J.B. Pritzker. And I think she's eager, not to necessarily hit back on J.B. Pritzker, but she's eager to be able to respond to some of the business interests in the city and to give people some kind of hope that, no, we're not going to be shut down entirely for another month. Maybe there'll be an opportunity to get out on the street more. And maybe this restaurant plan that I suspect is a lot further along than she's letting on, maybe that's going to be one of the answers to that.
Pritzker did not even meet with Sam Toya. I wrote a column this week about it. He didn't even meet with Sam Toya and the restaurant people before he came out with his, the nebulous Phase 5 program.
That's been John, that's been a common complaint you've heard across the board from the business community. You've heard that from legislators. You've heard that from the churches in particular. They're all saying that they feel that the Pritzker has been dictating to them, standing on the high horse of his science and his data, and not giving them enough information for them to be able to buy into his plan.
Restaurants are over 500,000 employees before this COVID-19, and he pays little attention to them. It's amazing.
And there's no doubt that there's so many of them are mom and pop stores. I've interviewed a couple dozen. John, I know you've interviewed a bunch. We all have. And they're not most of them are not going to survive this much longer. Steve Daniels, does that mean there is wiggle room in the Governor Pritzker's program, especially when you consider downstate lawmakers now, Madison County, they're defying the stay-at-home order. How is this all going to play out?
I think the broader thing here is that that we've already scrapped some of the numerical standards that he had set earlier for when we move on to different phases, and just said May 29th is when we're going to do it. And I think that was sort of a nod to the political reality that we're just, all of us are talking about right now, which is that people can't handle this level of lockdown longer than that. And those are the sort of judgments that politicians have to make, while also trying to keep people safe. The lakefront is another big issue. Why Lori Lightfoot is very dead set against reopening the lakefront anytime soon, but she's concerned about restaurants. She should be concerned about restaurants, but there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to why you would close the lakefront down and reopen restaurants. It's not well explained. I don't really blame any of the politicians for having trouble explaining it, because they're dealing with something none of us has ever seen, and they're doing it on the fly. But and I do think they've shown some flexibility recently, and I expect that will continue. But nonetheless, I understand why people are angry, because there's no rhyme or reason to it. Why does this person get to open up and not that person?
Plus, you have two politicians, in the mayor and in Pritzker, who are rookies. They really don't have political experience. They don't know. They're enjoying the celebrity status, and Lori's enjoying those memes. She's the superhero in memes. Memes cut both ways. Lori Lightfoot. You could live by the meme or die by the meme. And they just have to take a longer view, but they don't.
All right, let's move on to some other news this week. Sorry, Laura. I just want to talk about lawmakers heading back to Springfield to debate the massive budget deficit. Meanwhile, 3 million more Americans file for unemployment as massive layoffs continue. And after protests in front of her home, Mayor Lightfoot postpones more Little Village coal-fired power plant demolition. And as you heard earlier in the show, Senator Tammy Duckworth is apparently interviewing to be Joe Biden's vice president pick. Laura Washington, I interviewed a state senator last night from Grundy and Kankakee County, south suburbs, Kevin Joyce, a Democrat. He told me he believes Springfield will have a budget agreement by the end of May, the end of regular session. What do you believe that budget will look like?
Well, it would be amazing in and of itself if they were able to get a budget done within the 3 days that they have currently allotted, the 3 days next week that they are setting aside under very difficult and challenging circumstances in terms of security and safety, to be able to get a budget like that through. In addition, they're also talking about additional, at least the governor wants some additional aid from Springfield for the many small businesses who have been hit so hard, the businesses we've been just talking about, by the virus. And again, that's another big piece that it would be very challenging to get through. So the big question is, can they do all that in 3 days?
We've seen that before, though, where the budget comes down at 11:59 and no one has seen a word of it until they vote on it. Greg Pratt, what's the gap going to be and how are they going to close it?
Well, how they're going to close it is anybody's guess. It's going to be big. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be probably the story of Illinois for the last 10 to 15 years. I don't know if that means more debt. I don't know how they're going to address it, but there's just going to be a lot of trouble doing that, and Illinois doesn't really have the cushion for it.
Yeah.
And Chicago doesn't either. John Cass, how much money can be realistically expected to come from the federal government, both to the city and to the state?
I think that what they're doing is they're still hoping for a bailout. This thing started with Don Harmon weeks ago, sending a letter, please bail us out for all the bad stuff we did for years and years and years. Look, we have the viewers of this program, not all of them work for government. People who don't work for government are being laid off. They might lose their homes. Then you have people there's two classes of taxpayers in the state, government workers and non-government, private sector workers. And there's not been one. Have you heard of any layoffs? Maybe I missed it. Are there any layoffs in the city, the county, or the state? I know people are getting laid off every day and they're worried about their jobs if they're not working for government.
No, John, I think
it's upsetting.
John, I think it's interesting. The issue of layoffs was raised in an interview today with Lori Lightfoot, and she's putting that down sort of near the farther end of her priorities. And her top priority is what we were just talking about before, is getting federal aid. But the federal aid is not guaranteed, and all we've heard is very vague promises from Democratic leaders in Congress, and that's not going to be enough to get that across the finish line.
I do think in Washington, even though there's been some back and forth between Democrats and Republicans about this House bill that is going through tonight, et cetera, I think there's general agreement that there will need to be aid to state and local governments, if for not the only reason that Republican states need it too. Everyone needs it. This is not something that discriminates. Some states need it more than others, but all of them need some. So there will be some.
Yeah, I agree. The problem will be that if Illinois gets a lot of money and there are no strings attached, then the political class has no reason to even look at structural changes to think about the long term in the future. Pritzker is still Lightfoot doesn't want to cut any workers. Pritzker hasn't. He still wants his tax increase, his income tax increase, that amendment, but still hasn't discussed or would even entertain an amendment that would restructure the pension obligations. You have police unions, fire unions. I think they're like at 17% or less funded. I mean, this is a crisis on top of a crisis on top of a crisis. And until they
add to that the fact that, yeah, go ahead,
Yes.
John, go ahead and finish.
No, until they make all this is doing is illustrating, how, I don't mean corrupt in terms of putting money in your pocket, but if you don't want to cut, if you're not going to cut your own budget, and people that are watching this show are worried about their lives and their budgets and their homes being lost, and taxes are going up. The tax bill, well, they've deferred it, but it's supposed to be out on June or July 1st. Serious stuff, and there's not really a lot of, I don't think, responsibility going on.
I just wanted to add to that fact that because of the economic downturn, those pension investments have gone down, which means more money that city taxpayers, state taxpayers have to put into those funds. Greg Pratt, Alderman Anthony Beal told me in an interview this week he expects the budget deficit could be between $2 and $3 billion in terms of the city of Chicago's budget. Where do you think it's going to be?
Well, the mayor today said that she thinks it's going to be about $1 billion. I'd be careful with anybody's numbers right now because we still don't know how bad this is going to be or how long it's going to go. And so it's going to be bad. Probably $1 billion makes some sense, especially if that's what the mayor said they had last year, before all this. $3 billion sounds pretty catastrophic, but that's, Alderman Beal
Although,
has
Greg,
a reason.
didn't the mayor tell you, didn't she tell you that she might have to look at one-time revenue options? What would those be?
That's a great question. I did talk to her about that today, and she said there could be one-time fixes, but she didn't necessarily get into detail, except not something like the parking meter, which she said she still thinks about trying to undo, though obviously is not going to happen.
Steve Daniels, speaking of layoffs, another record week of unemployment. I met a laid-off chef this week from Roseland, and he was telling me that he's been trying to get access to the state unemployment system for 4.5 weeks. No success at all. Has the state figured out the glitches to this system yet?
Well, that's interesting because I hadn't seen a lot reported on that recently. So the answer is I don't know. I mean, obviously they've talked about doing that and getting it right and getting it fixed. When you've got the volume of claims that keep coming week after week, I mean, another 3 million nationally this week. Antiquated government systems are going to have trouble with that. And trying to fix those things on the fly, find people who can band-aid them up to make them work better is going to be challenging. So I'm not surprised that there are still glitches, but I haven't heard anything directly.
I want to get to some of this political news that we heard at the top of the show. Laura Washington, apparently Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth will interview to be Joe Biden's running mate. How high on the list do you think she is?
Well, from what I've read and heard, she is, she's maybe among 10 or 12 of the people that Biden will probably look at. I mean, she checks off some boxes in the sense that she's a war hero, that she's a veteran, that she's a prominent senator from a state that's important to Biden. But Illinois is a state that Biden is already going to have in his pocket. She's a woman of color, but many people believe that if Biden wants to go that route, he would be more likely to choose an African American candidate as opposed to someone like a Tammy Duckworth. But she's certainly a credible candidate, and it looks like she will be in the mix. I think that his committee is doing. He created a committee to do the reviewing and to help set up this whole process. And I think they're doing their due diligence and looking across the landscape. But I wouldn't say that she's a front runner at this point.
Greg Pratt, the mayor initially, the mayor's administration decided to green light another demolition at the old Crawford smokestack in Little Village. Then after some protests, she demurred. Why did they initially green light that, and why did they back off?
Well, what she keeps saying is that there's a little shack on the grounds of this facility of the former power plant in Little Village. that's going to collapse if they don't knock it down soon. And they're concerned that it might kill a trespasser or a worker. And so they want to knock it down. The problem is that everybody's scared of the last time they knocked down a building on that site, set a giant dust cloud throughout the whole neighborhood, which is working class immigrants and people who are used to being
Greg, I'm sorry,
abused by government.
we got to leave it there. Thank you so much. We're actually out of time, but thank you all very much. My thanks to Laura Washington, John Cass, Greg Pratt, Steve Daniels. I'm Paris Schutz coming to you from my home. I hope you stay safe and have a good weekend, and we'll see you on the next edition of the Week in Review. And now, Phil, we throw it back to you.
Thanks, Paris, and that is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight on the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And join us next week live at 7. Now for Paris Schutz, Brandis Friedman, and the rest of us here at Chicago Tonight, the Week in Review, I'm Phil Ponce. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning for this program is brought to you by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, serving Chicago as a personal injury law firm since 1984.